The scientific revolution starts now.
This is the Sci Podcast.
Let us see in the dark.
I went to University of Michigan to study computer science, and while I was doing that, I got fascinated with Vedas. Although I come from the land of Vedas, India, but some other, like you have to like step out of your territory to realize what did you have. So I got fascinated with Vedas. So once I graduated, I started working as part time as a data scientist, and I was doing that. I also was um, meeting spiritual seekers, spiritual practitioners, and they will always encourage me. Hey, Sid, since you are a data scientist, why don't you go and apply these skills, this training, to study the Vedas and see is there anything which we can gain from the Vedas, which shows that it has a nature, which is it has a nature of knowledge which is different from any other kind of knowledge which we get in schools. The idea being because many times people who study the Vedas or practice Vedas, they take it as a religious exercise or a religious book, and there is never a thought of experimentation. There is never a concern. There is always this idea that these are rituals. These you have to follow just based on your emotion. There's no question, and it makes sometimes very far out statements which are hard to believe. So then people who are skeptical and who haven't yet practiced the Vedic principles, they tend to be doubtful whether how many of these Vedic claims are actually true. So with that question in my mind, I started looking into the Vedas. That is there anything in the Vedas which I can uh, study and compare with the modern science and show that the Vedas have a silver line of truth, which is very unique to Vedas. And at this and Vedas are not just religious books, but books which are really coming from a divine source. Because I sort of over the period of time built my faith in these practices. I was practicing spirituality myself, and I was seeing it was working. I was seeing amazing. I was having amazing realizations, amazing experiences. So with that idea in my mind, I started studying the Vedas and the Puranas. Now, Vedas are huge, and there are actually many parts of it. There are parts which concern with grammar. There are parts which concern with music. There are parts which concern with mathematics, and the parts which concern with fire sacrifices. Elaborate. A part of the Vedas is called Puranas. Puranas are basically historical records. And those Puranas describe very significant events in the history of our Earth, universe, and solar system. So I started looking at those events and started saying, is there any kind of congruence between these historical events mentioned in this ancient book, Puranas, and the history which we have found from modern science? So with that question in my mind, I started studying the Puranas and their commentaries, and then based on that, after I did some study of those two set of knowledge, uh, I came across some amazing um, correlations, amazing studying correlations between modern science and this historical records mentioned in the Vedas, and that led me to publish a couple of papers and also write a book with another friend of mine. Um, Since then, I here and there again dabble with looking for more historical, you know, data points given in the Puranas and seeing if there are any more, uh, you know, congruences with the modern science. And I that's something we just I keep looking for it and sharing with people.
So you're saying that you're studying the Vedas, and there's a
Uh-huh.
specific section of the Vedas that is historical. And you started looking at the parallels between the historicity that we know of and what was written in the Puranas. And so, what are the overlaps that you found that sort of told you that you were on the right track?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I want to correct myself. I was not just looking only at the historical event, but I was also looking for any kind of information which can show mm, the transcendental nature or superhuman nature of the Vedas. Because the claim is that the Vedas are coming, as I said earlier, the claim is that the Vedas are coming from a divine person. Now, there's so many people who claim that I have this book, which I was having a realization, and this book actually is profound knowledge. You have to trust this. And so, whenever somebody makes a claim which is of superhuman nature, or like of super excellent nature, you have to support it with some really powerful evidence. You can't make a big claim. Extraordinary claims means extraordinary evidence. We know that one.
Mm.
So then, with that in mind, I was looking for any kind of data points which could show the superhuman nature of the Vedas, because, as I said, over the period of time, I had developed some faith that this is definitely superhuman nature.
My curiosity lies in understanding what the Vedas are, what you found in them, and the path that you took to the scientific ideas that are kind of downstream of it. Shiloh probably has a different set of questions that he's driven by.
I definitely want to get into that. I am curious though, before, because you teed something up where you said that you had these experiences that convinced you that there was some supernatural element to existence. And I know those are probably very deeply personal, but if you're willing to maybe share some experience that you had, or I'm always very curious about these moments that we have. We've been exploring a lot of them on the show recently. We actually had a mathematician the other day who was convinced that he had encounters with some entities that were not from this world that gave him all of his mathematical equations.
But he wouldn't call it God, right? Like, I feel like in a past era, he would be like, I spoke to God and God gave me the math. But it was a fascinating conversation, because it's like, well, that sounds like a conventionally divine experience that you're having. And so it's very
and like in my own personal life, I'm also trying to tune into this as well, right? When I'm a musician, also I'm a composer, and so I've found that the more that I tune myself to asking these questions to something beyond me, what should this sound like? I actually get answers in a sense. And so I don't know, I'm just very curious about your own experiences that brought you to this.
And even though one more thing, even though we call the podcast Demystify Sci, like, as you're talking, I'm thinking about this, where it's like, I think that one of the things we started the podcast with was a desire to demystify physics specifically, because we were preoccupied by the way that quantum phenomena are described in these very mysterious and magical ways. I think that there's increasing evidence of problems with the timeline after the Big Bang. And so, like, all of this was, it was the grounds on which we began the podcast. But as we've done the podcast, we've encountered more and more often the fact that there is something that humans can tune to that is the supernatural. And so you're one of the most explicit people in terms of wedding those things together. And I think that this is why it's so interesting to talk to you, because most people do it privately, and you get them, and they rarely will go into the world with it as their starting point.
Well, that's a lot of questions, and I'll try to remember and answer them one after another. I unfortunately didn't keep track of them. Anyways, I think we'll get into them all at some time. And I think I have a suggestion. So you go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, this is less questions directly and more just giving you a sense of where we're coming from, because I feel like it's always very asymmetric when you walk into a conversation where it's inside of the context of recording, and it's like, well, this is what we're curious about, and it's not like we're trying to just, dissect your ideas. We're genuinely curious about understanding how all these things fit together, and we don't have the answers for it.
We're kind of like space explorers. We're just wandering around in the space of ideas, and we visit different planets, right? We have conversations every day with people who think completely differently from one another, and we're just trying to understand the universe, essentially, the same as you, I'm sure. So, but yeah, I do think it's important, before we get into the actual work, that we maybe get a sense of what your initial experiences were that inspired you to do the work.
Sure. I can go in that direction. I mean, the first aphorism of the Vedas is Athato Brahma Jignasa, which is a Sanskrit phrase, aphorism. It's made up of three pieces. Athato means then, Brahma means into the divine or into the supreme, and Jignasa means inquiry. So the Vedas begin with an inquiry into the divine. So it's very nice that you have this inquisitive attitude, this curious attitude about the nature of the divine. Because that's the first qualification for somebody to enter into the realm of Vedas. Now, Vedas, in one sense, are books, and in another sense, they're an experience. Now, or a realization. And this realization can only be transferred from heart to the heart. So you can have access to all the books which in the Vedas, which Vedas are part of, which Vedas have inside. And you can go to, say, Oxford or Chicago, and there are big libraries there, University of Chicago, University of Michigan, and you can get access to the books which comprise the Vedas. They're huge. They will take up practically a whole house. That's how the vast they are, the Vedic, um, knowledge or taxa,
Wow.
and you can read them. But reading them and getting information is not the same as getting the Vedas. These are two different things. The Vedas are really about a realization of the supreme or the divine, which can only be transformed from a heart of somebody who is realized to another person's heart, who is a student. So to the degree I have realized Vedas, I can share with you. To the degree my teacher has realized them, he can share with me. And I can read the book all the time, but the realization may or may not come. It depends on the attitude I am coming with, and the mood I'm coming up with. So I really appreciate the mood both of you have. It's the mood of inquiry, the mood of seeking knowledge, and the mood of, your channel is being called Demystify Science. It should be called Mystifying Science, because you're basically, you know, bringing the mystery element back into the science. Science, that's what science means. Science means experimentation. Science means seeking knowledge. And all knowledge doesn't have to be just, same boring, one after another. It could be a mystical experience also. So it's mystical science or mystify science. That's what we're doing right now here on this podcast.
We have been accused of this on many occasions, and you're not the first person to suggest that.
I mean, I see. Yeah, it's a little bit confusing. We should have called it demystifying quantum physics or something. But
much more niche.
There's something we've realized though, which is that what we mean by that ultimately is that we're seeking cause and effect understanding, right? Mechanism, and of course, with something like physics, which I consider to just be material science, it's inanimate objects crashing into one another or pulling on one another, and so there's this whole other sea of complexity that occurs on top of that in the landscape of biology in particular, which is motivated objects, right? These entities that have will and desire, and especially at the human level of consciousness, all colors of conscious experience and emotion,
and also beyond on the foundational level too, right? Because there is a certain incompleteness to any physical theory where at the end of the day you stop before the question of why is there anything at all. And so the realm that is mechanistic is so confined at the end of the day, because both below it and above it are ample open questions that mechanism alone can't really deal with.
Yeah, and so the mystery really, really is important. Did you have one particular heart-to-heart experience at the beginning of all of this with one of your teachers that really, really convinced, really struck this faith inside of you that there was something beyond maybe what people think about as basic existence in the West?
Mm-hmm. Well, I wouldn't say there any one specific experience. I mean, there was like a barrage of experiences, a flood of experiences. And I since my for the last 10 or 11 years, I've been having a regular meditation practice. And every day I have an experience, you can say, in which I'm able to tune into this world where I feel, where I'm, feel this joy and this happiness and satisfaction, which I never felt before. I going to the school at my college, I could see that my professors, or my colleagues, my peers, they were working very hard and they were winning accolades. And I was also, like going to conferences, getting awards. But at all those, you know, award ceremonies or conference presentations, there was a sense of pride, sense of joy. But the joy I got from simple meditation experiences was much more bigger, much more deeper than any joy I used to experience from any of those, big events and big awards. And then when I saw that my colleagues and my peers and my seniors, my teachers, my professors at the university, they're working so hard for the same things, and yet they're not feeling that satisfaction. Whereas here's me just sitting and with a group of people and doing this meditation together, and I'm feeling this joy. Wow, this is something phenomenal. And since I'm also a very logical person, the more I read the philosophy of the Vedas, and more I heard the philosophy, the more it occurred on me that this philosophy makes much more sense. That what's the purpose of being a human? A cat or dog, they eat, they sleep, they mate, and they defend. A human being does all the four things, except it has to work very hard to those four things. And is that what human life is meant for? I'd rather be a dog or a cat. You don't have to worry about earning a big paycheck. You can still have a nice place to sleep and have a nice partner to sleep with, and don't have to worry about so many this and that. So the philosophy also makes a lot of sense that the Vedas talk about that human life is meant for inquiry, not just inquiry into new technology or just laws of physics. All those are good. Somebody can pursue them also. But at the end of the day, each person should have, a core of their life centered around some kind of a spiritual inquiry, a spiritual world where one is working very hard to develop, to, unwrap or to carve out the inner life, the internal life. And the more I have practiced my spiritual life, the more my inner life has become beautiful. The more I have, inner aspirations, which I won't be able to share here, what aspirations I have, but they're like a spiritual aspiration which I have. And they are very beautiful, and they inspire me, and they keep me going. And at the same time, I feel day to day joy, and it keeps on increasing day by day. I don't have to, you know, go to a bar and be drunk to dance. I dance all the time. I don't have to, go to some big music concert to sing. I sing every day practically, because that's what my life is all about. It's about singing, dancing, reading about stories, having fun with friends, and this is all centered around some kind of spiritual practice. So those are my many experiences which inspired me. Not just one, but many of them.
Hey, real quick, are you enjoying this podcast? Do you want to see more podcasts like this happen? Consider coming over to patreon.com and supporting the project. We need your help to keep the lights on, to keep this place as ad-free as possible, to keep sponsors away that might pull our strings in different directions. And in fact, the coolest part of our funding structure through Patreon is that we can get together with our patrons every week and learn from you what you want to see on this program in the future and what we can do to do our jobs better and make it a better experience. If you don't have any money right now, please share it with somebody, or come over to Discord and give us your thoughts there. Leave a comment down below. We'll do everything we can to keep up with these, even if we can't respond immediately. Your ideas are wandering around in our heads, and they are orienting us towards a better and better show. Also, we are having our first conference next April on the 6th or 7th in Austin, Texas, so consider blocking off that weekend on your calendar, and we'll have tickets up for sale very soon. It's going to be an incredible event with some of my favorite speakers that we've had on the podcast. So, hope to see you there, and let's get back to the conversation.
I mean, I resonate so deeply with what you're saying about the working hard and the search for satisfaction that seems so ephemeral, because Shiloh and I always talk about this, where it's like, okay, so you meet some milestone, but we're not even part of a big team. It's just Shiloh and me working on this project. And I'm always preoccupied by, what does it mean to be satisfied? What does it mean to get to a place and to be able to relax and enjoy it, as opposed to then immediately start thinking about, okay, what is the next thing? What does it mean to have a life that you move through where you are not constantly yearning or craving something that you don't have? Because that does seem to be the realm of hungry ghosts that most people, including myself, exist in on a regular basis. And so hearing you say...
Well, it seems like it's the void that necessarily follows from the lack of some steady spiritual practice.
Well, you and I always talk about this, where it's like we get hung over from being really happy. Like if we have a fantastic day and it's just so good, and we go to the river and we're swimming and we're outside and we get a lot of sun, and it's just, we're laughing a lot, there's always this feeling the next day of almost withdrawal from it, because then you go back into whatever the regular life is. And it sounds like you have found something that to you is the antidote to that.
Yeah, exactly as you said. One thing I want to correct myself here. It may look like I'm painting a very rosy picture of myself, that I'm somebody who's very self-realized. I'm not
You're
a
just
self-realized
frolicking
soul.
full time.
Yeah, it's not like I'm a self-realized soul. I also have struggles that where I keep thinking about the next thing, the next big thing. So the spiritual life is all about being in the present, and and being in the present also means being in present with the Lord, with the divine. So it's about connecting with the divine all the time, and He is accessible. He or she, however you want to say it, is accessible at every moment, at any time, at any place. It depends on us whether we want to connect to Him. And whenever we connect to Him, we are provided unlimited joy, unlimited happiness, unlimited beauty. And I have a daily practice of meditation, which I do every morning, and that sort of like recharges me up, because what happens is that as the day goes by, you know different things come up, this project, that project. I also manage a farm, so I have an animal sanctuary which I help take care of, and there's also a farm where I help manage the growing part of it, so we also have vegetable gardens, so I help oversee that too. And whenever you're managing that during the part of the day, you get sometimes preoccupied with different issues and different problems, and you're solving them. So by the end of the day, my spirituality also becomes very, very, becomes very tough. So at the end of the day, I also do some meditation. But mostly every morning, I have a regulated meditation practice, which I do for a few hours. And those few hours, I'm doing nothing else but just focusing on my real self, which is the soul. So the Vedas talk about this body is actually external, but beyond the body, there is a soul. The body is always changing. Like Shallow, one time used to be a small baby. Now Shallow is such a long guy with long hair. And same for Anastasia, used to be a small baby girl in his mom's lap. Now she's big. Now, where's that body gone? The small baby body. It's gone. Does that mean that Anna is gone or Shiloh is gone? No, the baby Shiloh and baby Anna are still here, except they have changed their body. So the Vedas talk about the body is always changing, and they will also change at death into another body, because this body becomes dysfunctional for the desires of the soul. The soul has a lot of desire. It wants to enjoy, it wants to know, and it wants to uh, do something, work something out. The three things they talk about. So and whenever the body becomes dysfunctional or incapable of being able to perform those three things, then the nature takes away that body and gives another suitable body. So suppose somebody has developed a desire for eating a lot of meat. They're just all about eating meat. So the nature sees, okay, although they have a human body, but because they have a desire for eating meat, maybe a suitable body for them would be a body of a tiger or some other carnivorous animal. That's how the Vedas describe. The body is always changing, but the soul is always there, and the soul is always growing in its experience.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's learning through hard experiences, sometimes through soft experiences, but the soul is always growing in its knowledge. And speaking of reincarnation, because we're touching on this topic right now, um, there's a professor, I'm sure you've probably heard of Professor Ian Stevenson at University of Virginia. He has passed away right now. I mean, passed away a few years ago. But he has collected about 2,000 cases of reincarnation from all around the world, where the kids below the age of 5 or 6, they will recount amazing details of what they were in their past life, with so much specification that their parents will be blown about somebody, they had no way to contact them or find out about. So yeah, this is like a key principle of the Vedas, that the body is always changing, and beyond the body is the soul, and the soul is hankering for a spiritual relationship. So it's very important to have a daily, some portion of your day where you connect with that, this divine source, and recharge yourself, set your focus back in. So I do that daily so that I can remain also that satisfied, that happy. But if the
Hmm.
days I don't do a good job, I also suffer. So I'm not there as selfless soul. I'm making my way there, you know. And I'm sure you also working on doing some regular meditation or spiritual practices, which keeps you so focused, which keeps you this curious. Otherwise, how can you have so many questions every day? How can you be so smiling and so happy and really inquire every day?
Well, yeah. I mean, a huge part of it for me is physical exercise. If I go running first thing before I even open my eyes hardly. And I feel like I feel sick for sure if I don't do that every day. Something physical, maybe I'm lifting also, or going to climb. We do rock climbing also. But there's also, for me, the meditation is very musical, right? When I go and play the saxophone or sit down with a guitar, I feel like the entire world disappears. And I'm just in this space of sound and really just listen. I really feel like I'm listening to something beyond me for sure. I've said this on the show a number of times, and I feel very I actually feel very uncomfortable talking about it because I don't have the language to articulate the experience that I have yet, but I should spend some more time examining it because when I go into that space, I'm completely disconnected from language and like thought in the traditional sense. And I imagine this is kind of what a meditation is like as well. I know Anastasia has definitely done some legitimate meditation, but I'm not sure she does it every day anymore.
I definitely feel much better when I sit down and I meditate without doing anything else. And I think that that is a particular thing. But for me, it is definitely, it feels better when it's physical because I like to move. And there was one time where we live near a park where there's a bunch of trails. And we had a day off and I went and I just kind of decided that I was going to walk until I naturally got tired and wanted to go home. Because normally I'll go up, I'll climb the hill, and then I'll be like, okay, I gotta go do stuff. And I gotta come home. And I walked, I think, for 3 hours. And very naturally was like, okay, this is the right amount. And I was thinking about it and I was like, what would my life be like if I could just go into the woods for 3 hours every day and just be there without having to rush through the experience? And I think that that's where my most effective meditation comes, is being in the woods and not having the feeling of I have to go somewhere else after this, because that pressure of needing to transition forces me out of the place where I can just kind of be in suspended animation.
Yeah, it's like a real struggle, right? Because we're barely getting by, right? I mean, in some sense, right? We're barely paying our bills. And so I feel this, well, just
dressed in
hear me out.
rags.
Hear me out. Like, I feel like it's a very real need to work all the time because I feel like our ability to succeed is directly pegged to how hard we work on the project. And there's definitely days where we get up in the morning and aside from some exercise or something, we're working until we go to bed and that's it. And then you wake up the next day and it's like the days kind of fly by like that and you're not really even, I mean,
Well, there's definitely moments, right, where what we're doing is we're just working, and there is a sense of you can't take a break from this. And I think that's almost invented, because Sid, like what you're saying is that there is your days are full, but you make the place for that where you are devoted to the practice, and I think that that's what makes the difference, right? Instead of being like, oh well, I can't find the time for it, there is time for it, and I will return to that place and I will contemplate the things that give the meaningful frame for everything else that I'm doing.
Now, I want to tell a story because Charlotte spoke on a very interesting point there. That he's finding it hard because days are very tough. And he has to work all the time. And is this story? This is something which is happening all around us. We have, it's not just you. You're not alone in that. Charlotte, I can assure you. You look at all the audience here. I'm pretty sure 90% of the audience will agree with you. They have the same problem. They can't stop. They have to work so hard to meet the bills. This thing is coming, that thing's coming. I will tell this story about one of my teachers. His name is Prabhupada. That's what students call him, Srila Prabhupada. So he had a desire that he wanted to share spiritual lessons with people all around the world, especially people in the Western Hemisphere. He comes from India. So he tried his whole life. Only at the age of 69, note it down, 69, he was able to come to US because his teacher said him, go from India to the Western countries and share there. So he came at the age of 69 to US. And when he comes here, he came on a cargo ship. After coming on a cargo ship, he had only one person's contact here who had, given a guarantee for his visa. This is in the 70s. And he had to his name $7 in his pocket. And he had no idea how to meet that person who had sponsored his visa. He landed up on a boat on a port in New York, in Boston actually, or New York, somewhere, one of those, Boston actually. And then he had to go to this person's place. So he had come at the age of 70 practically to the US, but he had a very strong spiritual practice, very deep practice. He failed his whole life for 70 years. He got the instruction from his teacher at the age of 20, late 20s, that you should go to the West and share spiritual lessons with other people. But for almost like 40, 50 years, he couldn't accomplish that. But at the age of 70, he lands here in the US. And then from the age of 70 to 82, he wrote uh, more than 100 books. He opened 108 centers all around the world. He went around the world 14 times, had more than 10,000 students. And that's all from the age of 70 to 82. And why he could do that? At the age of 70, when he landed on the port, he wrote a poem. And that poem, he said, and in the last stanza, that, "Oh Lord, I just want to become a puppet in your hand. Please make me a puppet, and let me become an instrument in your hand and do the things you want to do." So the idea being, we all are meant for some unique assignments in this world. It depends on how surrendered we are to that supreme will, the divine will. The divine energy is there to guide us and to empower us to the degree we are ready to surrender and to go with the flow. So when we take this spiritual practice seriously, although it seems like waste of time, why I'm putting 2 hours when I have like, hey, I have so many things to do. But when we make sure that we have a good spiritual practice, a strong spiritual practice, it connects us with the natural resonant frequency. And when you're resonant with the frequencies of the nature, then you can vibrate the longest, the highest, and create the biggest, impact. So although I understand the pressures you feel, at the same time, my experience is that whenever I have cut short in my spiritual practices in the name of some urgent work or urgent assignment, I've always had to have a lamentation or a remorse that I wish I had not cut short on my spiritual practices. Whatever spiritual practice it may be. It may be a 10-minute meditation, could be a half an hour meditation, could be a half an hour meditative exercise or something which you would want to do. But I feel like those are very important, very crucial, and they should always keep on increasing. We should always be going deeper and deeper into them with the help of a teacher. Again, in spiritual life, we all need a teacher. I can assure you, there's no spiritual life without a teacher. We can read books, but spiritual life, as I said, is a heart-to-heart matter. It is not information. Google cannot be your spiritual master. Chat GPT cannot be your spiritual master. They can provide you information about math, physics, Zoom, audio, you know, everything else. But spiritual life, we need a teacher. And with the help of a teacher, we keep on going deeper and deeper into our spiritual practices. And the more we invest into our spiritual practices, the more we will see amazing results. I didn't put much in research time into my research, but the findings I got, I feel they are very stunning. Although not many people know about them, but I have hope that in future more and more people will find out about them when people become more mature. Sometimes things take time, but I have no what do you call? I'm not discouraged or depressed about it. I know the Lord has a plan, the divine energy has a plan, and when the plan comes to fruition, these findings will become more popular. People will find out, and they can, use them. So that was my just 2 points, a story which I wanted to share about my teacher to you.
Mm. Let's talk about the discoveries that you made in your research.
Okay, so I'll start with the biggest one because we talked about the Big Bang. So the Big Bang, as we understand, has been you can say, an enigma for the cosmologists for the longest. If you were to ask a cosmologist, say 100 years ago, how old is our universe, you'll get a variety of opinions. The opinion against God was so strong in 1900s that our very own Einstein, he actually tried to modify one of the equations so that he could say the universe had no beginning. Um, and But in 1930s, Hubble, yeah, because of his Hubble telescope, could see that the galaxies were going further away from each other. And that forced the cosmologists to accept that there must have been a beginning to our universe. And Einstein later, had regretted that why did he modify his equation, at that time to go with the common opinion that the universe has no beginning. Anyways, since 1930s, the opinion among the cosmologists has been that there is a beginning to our universe. In 1930, the opinion was that our universe is 10 to 20 billion year old. And by year 2000, the estimate became smaller. It became 11 to 15 billion year old. Now, why am I telling you this history? The reason I'm telling you this history because I'm coming to a point pretty soon. So until year 2000, the cosmologists had only a rough idea of the date for the beginning of the universe, and it was 11 to 15 billion years. Um, but something amazing happened. What happened? Some scientists in the 1980s found out that, one second, I need to turn something on. Find out that that there are these waves, cosmic microwave background radiation (CMB), which actually are remnant from the beginning of our universe. These were released. This CMB were released or formed just 300 million years after the Big Bang. So once they found out some evidence for it, they started building technologies to capture it, to measure it, to study it. With the help of WMAP, Wilkelson Map Satellite, the cosmologists at the European Space Agency were able to come up with a date uh, as precise as 13.7 billion years. And then later, we had another satellite, Planck, which had zeroed it down to 13.801. So that's the latest estimate in 2019, 2020 of the age of the universe is 13.801. Now let's look at the Puranas. What does the Vedas speak about the Big Bang? So the Vedas talk about these demigods, or these, you can say, angels or superhuman beings who are in charge of the world in which we live. So there's this very famous person. His name is Brahma. Probably you have heard of his name. Brahma is like a popular common name coming
Mhm.
from the Vedas. So Brahma is especially in charge of our solar system. And for each solar system, there's a Brahma. Now, Brahma, his one day. So the Vedas talk about, the Puranas talk about there being different realms. Like we are in a realm which is considered like in the middle level, and there's realms which are higher above it. And Brahma stays in the topmost realm in this our solar system. When I say realm, what I mean is that in these different realms, the time moves at a different speed. Brahma's one day is equal to the whole construction and the whole life cycle of his solar system.
Hmm.
Now, Brahma's so in each life of Brahma, there is each day of Brahma, each year of Brahma, there are 360 days. That means there are 360 life cycles of his solar system happening in one year of Brahma, and there are many Brahmas. Anyway, so Brahma had a very significant event just before creation of our current solar system, and that event is described in the Puranas as the event when the whole universe was destroyed and recreated, almost like Big Bounce. So, Big Bang is a theory which everything comes from the beginning, from nothing. Big Bounce is another physics theory which is propounded by another group of cosmologists, which say that there was a universe prior to our universe and it collapsed, and then another universe came right away. So, Brahma, as according to the Puranas, there was a big bounce event which happened 13.819 billion years ago. The difference between this big bounce event, which is dated at 13.819 and 13.801 by modern scientists, is only 0.1%. The dates are exactly almost the same. Now, how can the uh, the Puranas, which are, there are copies of them available in all the major universities, which are said to be at least few thousand-year old, written by sages of India, how could they have such a precise date for the Big Bang? And this is a date which only modern scientists and cosmologists have found out very recently. 13.801 came only, five years ago. So that's data point number one, or discovery number one. Another one is about the origin of the sun. So the modern astrophysicists, they date sun using by rocks. They look for the oldest rocks present in our solar system. Like if I were to give you a rock and ask you how old is a rock, I can bet you cannot really make a guess, because two rocks that next to each other, one rock could be like a million-year old, another could be a billion-year old. You can't tell the difference unless you do very significant, very serious scientific experiments into the metallurgy of those rocks. So there are many kind of different dating techniques out there: uranium pp dating and argon dating. So the scientists or the astrophysicists who are trying to date the sun, they're always looking out for the oldest rocks in the system. And based on that search, they have dated our sun as being 4.563 billion years old. Sorry, 4.567, 4.567 billion years old. So that's the origin of the sun. That's the birth of the sun. As I said previously, that Brahma's one day is equal to uh, the whole life cycle of our solar system. And right now, as for the Puranas, we are halfway through Brahma's day. Now, Brahma's full day is stated in the Puranas to be, a time period. When we take only a half day, then we arrive at 4.563 billion years. So the modern astrophysicists claim that the sun is 4.567 billion years old, whereas the Puranas claim that the sun is 4.563 billion years old. The difference this time is 0.08% between these two dates. Coming closer, the Puranas also describe significant events which have happened in the history of the earth. The Puranas describe that there are many devastations or mass extinctions in the history of the earth. But the biggest or the most pronounced one was 251.9 million years ago. Now, as per the modern paleontologist, the biggest mass extinction which we saw on the earth was not the extinction of the dinosaurs, but was the end Permian mass extinction. So the end Permian mass extinction happened 251.3 million years ago. And the Puranas also describe, cyclical smaller mass extinctions, which I have documented in my book, some other dates also like that. So these three are major dates. And then there are a few more other dates which are not that big, but they're also significant in the history of the earth. So these are some of the data points. I have more I can share if you like.
How are the dates calculated? Because are they actually writing that, the Puranas say that it's this many billions of years to the beginning of the universe in its current configuration, 4.5 to the birth of the sun, or is it extrapolated from some kind of dating system or some kind of timekeeping system that's used in the Puranas, and that can then be extrapolated to our calendar year dating system?
It's not extrapolated, it's translated. So the Puranas are in Sanskrit. The way Puranas keep the dates is an interesting manner. The way they do is in this manner. The Puranas describe everything in terms of yuga cycles. So currently we are in Kali Yuga. There are four different ages. There's Kali Yuga, which means a dark age, and or the Iron Age. And there's Dwapar Yuga, which is a Bronze Age. Then you have the Silver, which is the Treta Yuga, and then you have Satya Yuga, the Golden Age. For each yuga, a number of years are given. How long each yuga lasts. It said that Kali Yuga is these many years, still in number of places. Satya Yuga is these many years. Dwapar Yuga is these many years. And then they say, okay, these many cycles of these four. So it's like a cyclical time measurement. So they say first there is always Satya Yuga, then Dwapar, then Treta, then Dwapar, then Kali. So this golden age for these many billion years. Then there is silver age for these many, no, not billion, sorry, million years. There's golden age for these many million years. And there is silver age for these many million years. And there is the bronze age for these many million years. And there's Kali Yuga, which is for these many thousands of years. So Kali Yuga is stated to be 432,000 years. Right now we are in Kali Yuga. Now a combination of these four is called a Divya Yuga or a Chatur Yuga. So it is stated that these many cycles of Chatur Yuga have passed since the beginning of the day of Brahma. So then you just add these numbers and multiply. There's no extrapolation or any required to go back to compare with this and that. Just it's additions and multiplication. So a combination of 71 cycles of Chatur Yugas is called a Manvantara. In Brahma's one day, there are 14 Manvantaras. As per the Puranas, we are now in 7th Manvantara, which means we are halfway through it. And in the 7th Manvantara, we are in the 28th Chatur Yuga. So in each Manvantara, there is 71 Chatur Yugas, of which 28 have passed. And in 28th, we are right now in the Kali Yuga. So if you want to find out the origin of the sun, then you just multiply 71 into 40 into 6 manvantras which have passed away into the the combination of whole Chaturyuga plus 28 Chaturyugas, and then you add them up and then you have a number.
I know that Shiloh has probably something that he wants to say at this point.
Oh, I'm curious. All right, so there's this Big Bang theory is in the hot seat right now in some sense, at least in some circles. And there's this early galaxy formation problem that's being addressed by the James Webb. Obviously, things appear to be fully formed much earlier than we had thought before the James Webb data started coming in. And there was this study that came out, I think it was on July 7th, in the Royal Astronomical Society by this University of Ottawa, I believe he's a cosmologist, astrophysicist, and he is explaining this data by actually pushing the date of the Big Bang back to almost twice as long. So I think he has 26 billion years. And it's getting a fair amount of play in terms of being entertained by serious scientists. And I don't know the details of it too well, but it seems like he is dealing with some of the redshift issues by bringing back Franz Zwickie's tired light idea and marrying that to some of the more expansionist ideas. But regardless, let's say hypothetically that the scientific consensus shifts and people start pushing this date of the Big Bang back. How would that affect your interpretation of these documents?
Very good point. This is the nature of you can say empirical science, that it evolves, and it is always seeking the truth. The nature of empirical science is always seeking the truth, and then whenever you have somebody who can provide a better explanation for the data available at hand, people go with that. So it's not surprising that people are pushing this date in different directions, and it may happen, and it may get pushed to 26. It may happen after 10 years, it may get pushed back to 13.8. And it's interesting that in the case of the origin of the universe, there is not many ways to verify that date, because there's only one source of data, and that is cosmic microwave background radiation. There's also, you can say, baryon acoustic waves, but which are also practically married to the same idea of CMB. So not much different from the evidence which we have at hand. So um, if the empirical scientists would come up with a different date for the Big Bang, that won't affect in any way the Puranic claim, which is that the universe had a beginning at this point. In fact, I will go on the strength of my experience and practice so far to say that because the Puranas are stating 13.801 as the date for the Big Bang or the origin of the universe, I'm pretty sure that the 26 billion claim won't stand the test of time. And
even the days, like the length of day, like I think I saw another study the other day that the length of the day was only 19 hours some hundreds of millions of years ago. This is what they're determining now. So I wonder if the clock of the day could also affect these measurements, right? Like I can imagine that whatever we end up believing empirically about the age of the universe, or if it even has an age, might have ways to be reconciled with the ancient traditions in a way that we just can't imagine right now.
Yeah. Well, we can also look more closer, closely at the origin of the sun. That's fairly solidly established, and that's not going to be pushed by any of the modern findings, because say something which is based on the dating of the rocks, which has been tested.
That I'm very skeptical of too, because all those dating techniques can tell you is the last time the rocks melted. And so certainly the oldest melts that we have are from 4 billion years ago or whatever. But we don't really know if they melted multiple times too. Like if there was some solar system wide catastrophe. Yeah, it's very, yeah. I mean, that's the problem with science, is you can only make a story up about the data that you have. You don't know about the data that you don't have. And so, and I'm also very skeptical of the CMB stuff too, but we can get into that. But
there's another way of dating the sun, not just the dating of the rocks. Another way is that you look at the life cycles of other stars, and based on the kind of radiation they are throwing, and being able to observe them in their life cycle, and then applying that same knowledge to our sun, that where it's in its life history, that also corroborates. In the case of the sun, it is being corroborated by multiple data sources, not just the dating of the rocks. Dating of the rocks, I can understand that there can be different things. And of course, in any kind of empirical science, that's the problem, that you can never be 100% sure. There can be something which we're not seeing. And, we can only make a story about what we are seeing, as you're saying. We can't have any story about what we're not seeing. So I agree with you. But in case of sun, we have multiple ways of corroborating that date.
Yeah, maybe you can explain that a little bit, because from what I understand, it's not like we can watch 4.5 million years happen.
Billion.
What's up?
Billion. You said million.
Oh, billion, excuse me. Yeah, so the best thing we can do is take snapshots of all of these different stars and sequence them in a way that makes sense with everything we understand. And that's changed radically in the last 100 years, the way that we think about that. Especially solar system formation is something that's changing radically in the last 10 years even. But yeah, I'm not sure how you would make a definite statement without being able to watch something actually unfold for billions of years.
I'm with you on that. There is no way to. There is nothing in this world which can convince a skeptic about any kind of empirical finding, because even if you see it, are you really seeing it? Who knows that somebody's putting a different show? Like there are people who believe the Earth is flat, and I'm not saying that they are wrong for sure, because I've not seen the Earth by myself, every portion of it, or got myself in a satellite to sit around and see, okay, Earth is really round. But the point is that whenever you are chasing an empirical fact, there's always a doubt. But the point I'm trying to raise here is that there's a number of different fields, the astrophysics, the cosmology, in which these dates have over the time monotonously moved closer and closer to the Puranic dates. The point I'm saying is that these dates somehow or other have landed in congruence with the Puranic dates. What does that mean? That doesn't mean that we should use Puranas as a means to study modern world or to do cosmology or physics. But what it means is that we should place some faith in these findings of the sages and then try their main experiment. The main experiment which is given in the Vedas is experiment with oneself, is the spiritual inquiry. So that's my main point, that why not adopt the lifestyle which Vedas is recommending? Vedas recommend a lifestyle which is in harmony with nature. Vedas recommend a lifestyle in which we are, very kind to Mother Earth. We are compassionate to other living entities. We're living a life which is chaste and honest. Right now, the philosophy which is given by modern science is the philosophy of, eat, drink, and be merry. And they think that's the philosophy which is coming out of the empiricism. There's no problem with that. When you take the Vedas as the source of knowledge, then people have a different philosophy, and that's where we are. That's my hope, that this should inspire people to look at the Vedas and the Puranas as a source of knowledge which can help them live a life which is full of purpose and which is much more fulfilling and happy.
That's actually a line from a Dave Matthews song, I think. Eat, drink, and be merry. But that's neither here nor there.
I think he might not have been the first person to say that.
Probably not. But it's interesting because we see this in the Christian tradition sometimes when I talk to scientists who are also Christians. And every once in a while, you get one who is fixated on the historicity of the Bible and trying to prove their faith by finding these empirical data points like the life of Jesus and so forth. And it's always bewildering to me when I ask them about their faith and they talk about their faith coming from this historicity. And I feel, I don't want to like pass judgment entirely, but it just seems a little misguided, because when you get too fixated on these facts, then you start to lose track of the spiritual practice that's being allegorically presented. And yeah, I wonder about the value of doing that.
Well, that's always there, that sometimes people use empirical means to bolster their faith in a spiritual practice, and that's a very tricky slope. I would not do that. I would have a faith in spiritual process based on my spiritual experiences. The the difference here between, say, a Christian scientist and the current findings which I'm sharing is that I'm sharing here precise numbers which are, you know, having an amazing or stunning correlation or congruence in modern scientific facts. I mean, you go out there and find me any old book which has a date for the origin of the universe, origin of the sun so close. You'll be surprised that people have been asking this question about the origin of the sun, origin of the universe for the last so many hundreds of years. And in fact, in 1800s, when the Britishers, for the first time, when they came to India and they came across these numbers, they laughed because they had all been brought up on the Christian philosophy, which was about having an Earth which is only few thousand year old. So they laughed, they scoffed, and how can the Earth or how can the universe be a few billion years old? But lo and behold, we have now these numbers matching up. I agree. Those numbers, maybe the modern science has this problem, that problem, and that's why those numbers can change. But still, the numbers which we have right now, they're stunningly, you have to agree.
No,
Right now,
that's
they're
crazy
stunning.
for sure.
They're, they're incredibly close to the modern scientific claims. How did it so happen? Maybe we're in lucky space of time where they have somehow or other mirrored up. But if you look at the history of these scientific dates, they have come closer and closer to Puranic dates. And I'm hoping that it will become more closer and closer, but that does not disturb my faith because my faith in spiritual life is coming from spiritual practice. It's not, you know, just balanced on this empirical findings. If I had not find these dates, would my faith be tortured? Would it be dodged? No, because again, my spiritual practice is based on my spiritual faith is based on my spiritual practice. And I'm just sharing these dates to show that the claim which many spiritual followers of the Vedic tradition make, the Vedas are an absolute truth, may be true in some regard. And when you see at these dates, we're making a claim. The claim is that the Vedas are coming from a superhuman source, and here we have an extraordinary data which supports that claim. That's the only call I'm making here.
I mean, I think that there is ample evidence to say that the Vedas are very old, and that texts that are this old, that are preoccupied with the questions of origin and cycles, and are thinking about the solar system, and are thinking about the universe, and are thinking about the history of the Earth and these extinction events, that displays kind of an astonishing depth of knowledge, which, I don't think that the Christian Bible deals with this kind of geological, anthropological history of the planet. And so if you argue about the dates, fine. Like there's open questions about how empirical science will align with the dates or not. But it does speak to the documents being from a culture that had figured a lot of stuff out and had a tremendous amount of knowledge. And I think that that reflects something deeper and more interesting to me, because we have this perception that our Western society is the first one to have this complete sense of cosmic order and planetary order. But if the Vedas are talking about these things, then it suggests that the culture that wrote them already had this knowledge. And that, in some way, is supernatural, because the way that we look at the past is to imagine primitive societies that couldn't possibly have come up with such wisdom. And I think that that's where the grain of truly interesting ideas lies, which is, where do these ideas emerge from to be written down in the Vedas? Who are the people that had this insight?
That was so profound the way you put it all together. That you know the Vedic culture where this knowledge is coming from. We should be more curious about that than to be concerned about whether the modern findings are precise or accurate, or are they based on wrong basis or not. But this whole idea that how come a Vedic culture be talking about so many subjects in so much detail, and then us, because we have this idea of looking back at the past and thinking that that we are the most advanced form of human beings which are on the planet Earth. But maybe that is up for a question now, you know. And that was very beautifully put by you. So thank you.
I appreciate that. I mean, but I can't.
there's a lot of people right now, and we've been having
I was going to
conversations.
say, I can't take credit for that idea.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are convinced that humans have either descended from something much greater than the archaeology imagines, or that they've had contact with somebody who has. And there's endless argument and cases being made for that. So
I also think that it's more interesting to talk about the universalities and the things that emerge from these ancient texts than it is to argue about the specifics. Because you said something about skepticism early in the conversation where you're like, if you have a skeptical mindset, you can look at something and you can poke holes in it. And I think that's a useful skill for a scientist or a philosopher or anyone to have. But the way that I see the goal of this project is to find the commonalities, because the commonalities are going to be the pieces from which we can build an understanding that is greater than the one that we have right now. And I kind of got this from Shiloh because he's always looking at texts and ideas and various sources that might not have the reputational heft that's associated with sources that are accepted by the scientific community or something. And yet he's able to always pull something interesting from them where he's like, look, even if they're wrong about all this other stuff, I think that this is an interesting point. And this point can be folded in with this point and can give us a better understanding of nature altogether. And so I feel like you're helping us put together a better sense of the history of Earth, because these are texts that are unquestionably old, and you can split hairs about just how old they are. But unless somebody's purporting that they were written in the last 100 years, then you're left with the conflict of how did they know? How did they know to ask these questions?
who were these people? Who are these ancient people that put these together?
Yeah. And there are many questions, because this dates are not the only thing. In my book, I also record distances, like distance of the heliosphere, which is a boundary to which our sun's gravitational forces, act like a protective shield, which protects us from all radiation coming from other parts of the universe. Then there's a description of eclipses, as I was telling you, that's one of the recent discoveries, the origin of eclipses. When did eclipses start? There's a precise date for that given in the Puranas. Although modern science has not yet got a date for it, but they're talking in that rough range. Then the discussion on embryology. There are some very precise details given on embryology in the Puranas, which are very profound and have only been recently discovered in the field of biology. So in all these different various scientific fields, there is information. But again, these information is only, you can say, perfunctory or form like maybe like 5 to 10% of the whole Vedas or Puranas. And they are actually not described just as a topic or discussion. Well, let's discuss about Earth. No, usually the discussion is about a person. So everything is a person, and there's a history given about a person. So there's a discussion about Brahma's life, and as discussion about his life, it is mentioned that actually at the beginning of his day, the sun is created, and right now we're halfway through his day. So it is not that there was a whole chapter about origin of the sun. No, the chapter is about what is Brahma's, how old is Brahma now, and what is he doing. So there's discussion about a person, and when you go there with the inquisitive mind, you can get this data out. So the idea is that there is laws of nature, but there is also these controllers who are guiding these laws. And the Puranas are describing a history of those superhuman beings which are all around us. In fact, the Puranas claim these superhuman beings are all around us, but we don't have an access to it because we only have access to these 3 dimensions. But they are in some higher dimension world. um, so are these beings who wrote the Vedas only in the past? No, they are present even now also, but not accessible to us. And the Vedas also tell us a process by which we can access them. In fact, we can become one of those superhuman beings, the superhuman capacities. And the process is having a deep spiritual practice. And Vedas are all about having a deep spiritual practice. So there are many facets of different spiritual practices. There's a facet of austerity. There's a facet of penance. There's a facet of meditation. There's a facet of generosity. There are many different facets of this spirituality. But as we practice them deeply, we become one of those superhuman beings who have access to such forms of knowledge, access to that culture. So the Vedas are not saying that this happened only in the past and no longer have an access to this culture, but actually they're saying we have an access to it, but right now we are so much covered up that as we become more and more materialistic, we become disconnected from this world, from where this all this knowledge has come through. Another question which can be asked here is that, or another data which we can talk about is the languages. Currently, we have this idea that all the languages which we have around here, they're coming from, uh, you know, Latin or Sanskrit, and before that, what's it called? Was it?
Proto-Indo-European.
Yeah, Proto-Indo-European language. And but if you look at the grammar, I'm not studying Latin in detail, but I've heard from spoken Latin speakers. You see the grammar for the Latin or grammar for Sanskrit. The grammar for Sanskrit is ornate. It takes somebody at least 12 years of study and memorization to be able to learn Sanskrit, and it's beautiful like anything. Now, whatever experience which we have, this is one of my recent realization, whatever experience which we have the languages, we see languages that become more and more simpler. Right now, if you see people text, they're becoming more and more, short. There is not so much, beauty. So how can this be the case that the ancient culture has such profound, such, amazingly ornate languages, which are, which take so many years to study and master, whereas they're supposed to be people who are coming from living in a cave. So definitely, there is definitely some break in history which we have. We have this wrong idea of history. We think we are just all coming from being a caveman. I feel that actually there is like merging of two different cultures. There is a culture coming from these superhuman beings, a superhuman culture, and there's a culture which is coming from this being a caveman too. It has now merged, and now we have this one history only, which we think that it's all coming from caveman. But actually, if you look at the past, we will always find these people who have amazing qualities, amazing skills, and amazing realizations, and they have recorded those in these books. And these books are a proof of that. And they're asking us to join them. They're asking us to also become one of them.
I often think about how if something terrible happened, let's say we got hit with an asteroid tomorrow, how most of the world would probably become, whoever had survived would probably become a caveman. And there might be one or two people or some pod that was able to maintain a lot of our civilization's knowledge into the future. And I wonder if I often wonder when it comes to the deep history. I really do think that archaeology suffers because, just like all of science, it can only make stories up about what it can find. And inherently, the further you go back, the harder it is to find anything. I've made the point on this show many times, but I have a friend who has a ranch. He's put a bunch of cars out in the sun for the last 50 years. They've almost turned into dust, right? How much of this of our material civilization will really be apparent 10,000 years from now, for instance? And so I wonder if there just isn't I wonder if the caveman track and something more advanced could be happening, simultaneously, but out of, in different phases of existence.
The question here is, how old are these documents, right? Because you have the rise of the earliest versions of what can plausibly in the mainstream be accepted as modern civilization with like Göbekli Tepe. And that's 11,000 years ago. There's good evidence that there's probably stuff that predates that, because it seems crazy that it just appeared 11,000 years ago and we haven't been. The likely explanation is that we just haven't found it, because anything that was around would be underwater at this point. Underwater archaeology is really difficult. And so in context of the Vedas, is there a date for when the first versions of it appear in text, and then a date for when the first oral history of it appears, or is it kind of lost to the mists of time?
So there is a history of the Vedas given in the Vedas itself, and there's a history of the Vedas built together by the modern secular people. If you go by what the Vedas themselves speak about their history, they claim that the Vedas are eternal. They're coming from a different realm. They're not belonging to the realm, which, as I said, the caveman world. They're coming from a superhuman world. And they were written down as per the Vedas themselves, some 5 to 10,000 years ago, closer to 10,000 than 5,000 years ago. That's when they were written down. If you go by the modern secularists, there is a bunch of different opinions, but they range from that they were written down somewhere around 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. That's what they claim, in terms of the written history. But they both agree that before they were written down, there was definitely a big oral tradition of Vedas being transferred from a student to teacher for much longer of time. But how, when, there are many questions there, because I said Sanskrit creates so much big problem, because if you look at this language, it's so ornate, it's so beautiful, and it's so early that it doesn't fit with any of the timelines. So there are many questions out there regarding the language and historicity of the writing of these books. And whatever, I mean, these are many open questions for people who are in that field of historical linguistics or historical anthropology, something like that.
Do you have a sense that there's some connection to, we were talking yesterday to Samo Buria, who runs this like geopolitical analysis firm. And he mentioned the Bactrian Empire, which was kind of on the steppes and north of India. And there's also the Indus Valley civilization that we don't really know very much about at all. Do you trace the history of the Vedas back to this region and this empire, or is it, because when we talk about it coming from supernatural beings, my rationalist empirical mind immediately is like, okay, so that sounds like a story of people who had figured out something that the cavemen had not figured out. And then there's this blending of cultures, and then there is a new culture that comes out of that. And so, as you say, we're now in the Kali Yuga, and it makes me think of, I was looking up different metals yesterday and their conductivity, and you can take two metals that have different conductivity. Like copper is very conductive, tin is much less conductive, but you blend them and you make brass, and brass is much worse at conducting than either one of the two metals that went into it. And so the Dark Age period I can kind of translate as this blending of a clean knowledge that comes from a more advanced culture with the knowledge of a culture that still lives in caves, and there's this turmoil period as that knowledge gets worked out, and the moral systems have to catch up, and there's this many generations long process before you finally get to the place where you are enlightened enough to then be able to pass your ideas on to a new culture. And so, to wrap that very long ramble up, the question is, where do you think the provenance would come from? Like, who are these supernatural beings in your mind? Are they deities, or are they people on Earth that have been cast into a supernatural role because of a vast divide in abilities?
As I mentioned earlier, that these are the sages, and they are described in the Vedas as, um, the writer of the Vedas themselves describe themselves as, the history. They share the history also in these books. And as I read their histories, they seem like people like us, with uh, similar lifestyle, and they look like they are also living on Earth. But what's clear to me is that what they share in their life is that they really strived very sincerely for their spiritual, life, or their spiritual practices. And along the way, while pursuing those spiritual practices, they were gifted these amazing qualities, amazing skills, amazing abilities, which enable them to accomplish feats like writing these books and sharing their realizations. So they also share their practices and their realizations in these books. That's what these books are mostly all about. It's about their practices and their realizations. And they're inviting us that you also try these practices, and you also look what kind of realizations you get. And then based on that, you try another experiment, and you try another experiment, another practice. And then they're inviting us that you come and you try it out. That's the idea. And I can say, in some sense, that my teacher, whose story I told earlier, Srila Prabhupada, is an example of such a personality. Otherwise, how do you imagine somebody who's 70-year-old to write so many books, and to become so popular, and to have such an impact on the spiritual growth all around the world? It's because he was divinely empowered, because he so-called attained the superhuman status. Sometimes we think of supernatural beings, superhuman beings, as somebody who is very foreign. Actually, they're my understanding as I grow more and more spiritual life, they're just one among us, but they have just made more progress and they have gone past that barrier. Like they have this Mac 1, which is like the sound barrier. You cross it, then Mac 2, Mac 3. So they have gone past the different barriers, and there are many different barriers which we will face, but they have gone beyond that. And so I personally don't see, as in my reading of the Vedas and my experience that these superhuman beings are somebody who's very far away from us. I feel they are here on Earth and they are here in some accessible also, but because they have raised themselves consciously, that they're able to experience Earth in a different manner. They're able to access knowledge in a different manner. They're no longer dependent on just telescopes or satellites for measuring something or knowing something. They can look at something and tell what's really happening because they have raised their consciousness to a higher level.
There's a very real deficit, it feels like, something that we're really struggling with in the West, which is reconceiving of practices as technologies in and of themselves. We've traditionally, especially when you look at something like medicine, when you think of what's a medical solution, well, historically, at least in the modern era, it's been let's design a drug or a surgical procedure, something very material.
Leeches.
Leeches, yeah, good point. Whatever it is, it doesn't. It's very strange because people now, it's, if you want to do one thing for your health, what can you do? Well, exercise for 30 minutes a day. It's absolutely going to prolong your life.
Or meditate.
Or meditate, right? There's all of these things that are kind of well known, well documented, but yet they don't quite fit into the framework of Western material science. It's like there's something about those behavioral changes and modifications and spiritual changes that doesn't get treated as a technology, even though I think it very rightly is a technology.
Yeah, beautifully put. Beautifully put there. That I can't say anything more than that. That sometimes we think that they're not technology, but they're also technology which we have to learn. We have to invest in learning it also.
And so, if you were to give someone advice who is looking out onto the world and is scientifically minded and perhaps a little bit lost or not certain yet of where to go, what is the advice that you would give them?
You mean for spiritual growth or for spiritual practice? For what? Advice for what?
Advice for living a life that has meaning.
Uh-huh. Well, as I said earlier, that the first thing would be to find a spiritual teacher. They should look for a teacher who has, uh, you know, who can inspire them, who can answer their questions, and with the help of the teacher, made an inquiry into the Vedic books. They're available online these days. The Sanskrit texts have been translated. The one, especially the Puranas, which I highly recommend. And I can share a link with you guys. You can put it in the chat in the description. And there's a very amazing. There's a translation done by one of my teachers, Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, of the Bhagavad Purana, which is one of the you know most popular versions, or most well kept and well followed portion of the Puranas called the Bhagavad Purana. And you can study. You can read it, his translation. Actually, if you read his translation, you're basically taking guidance under him. So even if you don't find a teacher, if you would read his translations and he also gives a commentary, then by reading that and by following the commentary, you will feel yourself a lot of joy. A simple practice could be you read his books or that book every day for 15 minutes. I can assure you, because I read these books regularly also, that you will find newer ideas and newer perspectives on your spiritual journey, your spiritual practices. Because in these books, in these commentaries, he will share a lot of different practices, a lot of different ways in which you can grow spiritually. So that's one advice.
How do you find a good teacher?
Mm.
Because I mean, for me, yeah, I don't really want to crack open this can of worms, but I feel like going into nature is kind of a teacher. And all these conversations I have with people like you, like I've learned from you today, and I learned from all of these conversations, and I learned from my friends, but I can't imagine how I would find an external party to that.
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question. How do you find a teacher? So the Vedas give three qualities for a teacher. First, the teacher should be self-realized. Number two, the teacher should be well versed in the Vedic textbooks. And number three, the teacher should be able to satisfy the queries of his disciple or his student. So when you're looking for a spiritual teacher, you go to him with spiritual questions and you ask him questions and you hear them not only from your ear but from your heart. And you should feel a sense of satisfaction in your heart when you hear from them. And then whatever he speaks, you should be able to find a supporting realization of that, what he's speaking in the Vedic textbooks. Because sometimes people can say wonderful things. There are many wonderful speakers, articulate speakers on the internet. But that doesn't mean that makes a spiritual teacher, because what they're speaking may not be mentioned in the Vedic textbooks. So whatever they speak should also be stated in the Vedic textbooks. And number three, that they themselves must have mastered the art. It's not that, like, there have been many teachers in India who would say, put in a good show when it comes to speaking. But if you spend some time with them, you will find out that they are having troubles with addiction. They're having troubles with women. They're having this and that trouble. So
Mm.
it's also very important to closely observe them, to stay with them, stick with them, and to see where they are. Then, like, there are many scientists out there who claim, that they have access to knowledge, this and that, and there's no God. But if you look at their lives, their lives are a wreck. So, same with any spiritual teacher, that their life should be an example. Their life should be a teaching. Like Saint Francis used to say that I preach all the time, but when needed, I speak. So, a spiritual teacher is always teaching by his own example, and he will barely speak. You know. Now,
Oh,
how can
that's
you
so
find one?
good.
So,
Yeah.
that's how can you find one? By sincere prayer, because the nature is always watching you. As you said, you go to nature for answers. That's a beautiful thing. I recommend you keep going that for nature for answers. But when you're really serious, nature will also embody that intelligence of the nature in the form of a teacher in your life. But you have to be really inquiring for that. You have to be seriously curious for that, and then the teacher will come.
Hmm.
It's such a really painful lesson that I feel like I had to learn on my own, which was that the teacher has to be able to exact these changes in their own life. I grew up on the Bible of rock and roll and folk music and blues music, and it was really painful for me to realize that a lot of my heroes had disasters in their own lives. While they were able to, put forth epic poetry on paper, they weren't able to actually live it out in their own lives. And at the end of the day, I was left with like maybe two or three people that I can really stand behind at this point. And yeah, that was really, really painful. I wish somebody had kind of given me that advice when I was a kid.
But I think that it's really true in my own experience that I have a hard time not looking at people's lives when I'm listening to their ideas. And it seems crazy that you would consider what a person's life looks like if they're telling you about some physical concept. But all of this is so deeply integrated that the scientific ideas that you have and that you put out into the world are informed by the ideas you have about the fundamental nature of the universe and reality. And there's a lot of people that we talk to on the show that seem to believe that we live either in a dream or a simulation, or that there's no such thing as reality, and that it's all kind of this strange imagined experience that we have. And I find that those people tend to be pretty torn up on a personal level, and I think that those things are inexorably related. Where if you live in a world that is a game, or a simulation, or a dream, how can you possibly be vested in it? How can you
Or
possibly
take responsibility for it.
Yeah, like how can you possibly take ownership of someone else's simulation? And so I think that
Yeah,
that's powerful insight.
I know you have a wonderful speaker on Shiloh, both of you too. I mean, you have both put together the thoughts, which I couldn't say so well, but you have actually put it there. That is important to observe their life, not just when they're on the podium, but to see how they live their life. And as you have put out there, that in your case, Shiloh, it was your music, the composers, and in your case, you have talked about people who are scientists. But again, the question is, how are they living their life? Are they satisfied? Are they happy? Are they feeling fulfilled? If yes, in the rest of their life, maybe there's something we can learn from them, and maybe they could be our spiritual teacher. But again, we have to observe them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think by like making yourself a better person, everything you do in the world becomes a lot easier. You know, if I really just if I single-mindedly focus on making myself a better person, then I don't have to worry about whether I'm a good podcast host or something like that. I don't have to think about, I don't have to come into this show and be like putting on a show so much. I can just be myself as long as myself is getting better and I'm oriented towards something that makes that have an aim that is higher. Then that's all I have to focus on a day-to-day basis, which is actually really simplifying and freeing. And I think it's very functional too. So anyways, I really appreciate you coming by. I know you got to run, but do you have any closing thoughts for us? You know, anything you want to say before you take off? Obviously, we'll plug your book and put the links in the description, but what do you have
Thank you.
any final words of wisdom for us?
I guess I'm very thankful that somehow or other I have come in touch with both of you, and I'm quite amazed. I was not expecting this to be such a relaxed and such a profound discussion. It felt like I'm sitting in my dining room with two good friends who I've met after a long time, and I'm just sharing with them my recent history, what has happened in my life, and you guys have very patiently listened to my warbling and my ramblings. So I'm really grateful to both of you, and I just have only gratitude for both of you, and I wish you all the best.
You as well, and I hope
Thank
that we
you.
get the chance to do it again.
Yeah. I hope this is just the beginning of a friendship.
Sure.
All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, sir, and
Thank you.
let's catch up down the line.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Have a beautiful day.
You as
Take
well.
care. Bye.